Thank you so much for joining me, Tony. Now, Tony, I was just in the sort of, pitter patter before you came on. I was just mentioning your book, Return to Moscow, and your career as a former career as a diplomat in Australia. From memory, you were ambassador to Poland, but there were a few other countries involved as well in your diplomatic career.
Yes, I was ambassador to Poland and then ambassador to Cambodia.
Yeah,
they were my two ambassador level posts.
Yeah. Yep. And was the Cambodia post like that? When was that, in the 90s? Was it post the big Cambodian peace process?
Yes, it was immediately after the Cambodian peace.
Yeah.
I came in a period which was supposed to be very calm, but in fact turned out to be quite unsettled politically and militarily. There was a little war between Prince Ranariddh and Hun Sen, which resulted in Hun Sen's victory and Prince Ranariddh's departure.
Yeah.
And there was also a kidnapping of hostages in which I was very much involved. And there were paedophilia issues hanging around from past history as well. So it was a fairly interesting.
Yeah. Tony, can you just move a little bit, I think, to your left, so you're a little bit more central camera? Yeah, awesome, fantastic. That's fantastic, Tony. Fantastic, Tony. And look, there's many things that we can talk about. The sort of general world situation. Particularly, I'm keen to talk to you about the sort of Russia-Ukraine situation. But Australia's been doing the Australian thing in recent times, expelling the Iranian ambassador for some reason, and being very, very late in the game in terms of recognising Palestine and strengthening its response to the events in Gaza. So we might get to that a little bit later on, but one of the absolute joys of reading your book, Return to Moscow, which I add anyone can get from public library or from the publisher as well, is just your engagement with I guess Russian culture, Russian society, trying to actually understand Russia as such, rather than just demonize it. And I actually had a little quote in the notes on the stream to the show, which I was reading out before, that you said and I guess you would have written this in 2016, that the Western alliance is now trapped inside its own falsely created alternative reality of Putin's Russia. Yeah. And I guess this just raises this whole question of Russophobia is a term people use, just the, very anxious, hostile attitudes towards Russia that, sometimes you also see, I guess, seen in relationship to Iran or seen in relationship to China as well. But Russia's been a particular target of it in recent years. What's been your experience of this sort of Russophobia within Western culture?
I feel that in Australia it's steadily got worse over the years since the Ukraine war began. And some say in 2014, others say 2022. There are different narratives on that. But it's been on a downward trend in Australia. And I think there are various factors streaming into that. I might just quickly list them. One is the attitudes among Australian Jewish communities. Many of them have a family history of forced emigration from Russia following the various pogroms under the imperial rule of the Tsars. And then also in Soviet times, there are various emigrations of Soviet Jews, a lot left in the time of Gorbachev. And there's a bit of a backwash of Russophobia, which is very prevalent among many Australian Jews. Some of whom are not even Zionist. They're simply Russophobic, full stop. And secondly, of course, there's a whole Ukrainian diaspora. A lot of people came to Australia after World War II from what had been the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic with a massive anger and grievance against Russia and against communism, which simply carried on the years after the breakup of Soviet Union, and now, of course, is still there, very much so, with the Ukraine-Russia war. That's a huge influence in Australia. Thirdly, there's the anti-Catholic, there's the Catholic anti-Russian attitudes which were bred into us at primary school. We've all, learnt about godless communism and so on, and priests and nuns being massacred in Spain and all those stories.
Yep.
And I think that's still very strong, particularly among older people with a Catholic background. So and then finally,
I guess, Tony, I guess the Australian's international reporter, it seems, since 200 BC has been Greg Sheridan.
yes.
Yeah, and well, I guess he's a little bit up that ilk.
And the ABC's full of quite clever Catholic women. I'm thinking of Geraldine Doog, for example, and there are many like her, who carry that Russophobia in their bloodstream. Really, they can't do anything about it. And then finally, of course, there's a whole whatever you might call the Australian military-industrial complex, which is very strongly wedded now to American military power, and has a strong professional career interest in maintaining the rage against Russia. So you put all that together, and you've got a pretty powerful coalition of forces. And I have found pushing a snowball uphill, trying to defy that. I rather envy my colleagues in the independent thinking movement overseas, because I think they have the advantage of numbers. I sometimes feel rather alone here in Australia. And I'm disappointed that a magazine of the tremendous quality of, for example, Pearls and Irritations, does seem to have been affected by the Russophobic climate, I'm sorry to say.
Yeah,
and,
indeed.
It's a shadow on the magnificent reputation of John Menadue and his team. And I'm not sure I'll ever be able to persuade them to think differently about that, but I won't give up.
Yes, indeed. I do remember when I wrote my first piece after, sort of being retired early from the public service and starting this late life career as a writer and YouTube commentator. I published it in Pearls and Irritations, and one of the things I said in the Pearls and Irritations is, there are these brave voices in the media who don't get, a fair go, and one of them was you, Tony. So it's a real honour to speak to.
Well, the important thing is not to succumb to self-pity. But to just keep plugging away and take my victories when I get them. They're pretty rare these days, and just enjoy the intellectual excitement of keeping up with what's happening, because we're at a hinge point in history at the moment. Before I came on with you, I was watching some of the RT news real coverage of the military parade in Beijing, and I felt a sense of a lump in my throat, really. Here is this magnificent array of commemoration of a terrible war for China, 30 million dead in the war. Russia lost 26 million. Both of them suffered more than any other country to save the world from fascism. And both of them are still fighting those struggles even today, 80 years later. And so I felt a definite lump in my throat.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely profound events. And, a sad lack of, I guess, dignity about at least some in the Western media in terms of how they actually comment on astonishing ignorance at times about how they comment on these things. Speaking of lack of dignity,
Jeff, I was delighted to read the latest tweet from President Trump to Chairman Xi.
I
don't know if I can find it in a hurry, but it was a typical Trump performance, and remarkable, actually, remarkable. I'll just see if I can find it because it really is priceless.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Here we
Yeah.
go.
Oh, here we go. Yes, let's have a
Just a
little
moment.
read.
Just a moment. Just a moment.
Hopefully there were some caps involved.
There definitely were
It's not
caps.
a Trump tweet.
Yeah, here we go.
Tweet on.
Here we go.
Oh yes. Okay.
Sorry
You
to.
want to read it to us? Yep.
I can't help smiling. It's
Yeah,
disrespect
yeah.
to
No, it's got.
President.
I've just got you on solo layout while you read it, Tony. Yep.
The big question to be answered is whether or not President Xi of China will mention the massive amount of support and, quote, blood, unquote, that the United States of America gave to China in order to help it to secure its capital's freedom, end capitals, from a very unfriendly foreign invader. Many Americans died in China's quest for victory and glory. I hope that they are rightfully honored and remembered for their bravery and sacrifice. May President Xi and the wonderful people of China have a great and lasting day of celebration. Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un as you conspire against the United States of America. President Donald J. Trump.
Wow, there you go. Who would have thought that a couple of weeks ago, they were meeting, sitting in a car together in Alaska, and who I wish wouldn't it be? I hope someone recorded that conversation for the benefit of a historian 100 years from now. Hopefully, it was a fairly one-sided conversation.
Well, the amazing thing is that Putin continues to be, and also his key lieutenants, continue to be very warm and respectful in their messages about Trump. They seem to have accepted philosophically that he's a very mercurial character, and this week's friend is next week's enemy, and he's a bit like your angry old uncle who gets emotional at Christmas parties and can't be relied upon to sort of hold his tongue. He
Yeah,
just says what comes out.
yeah,
Obviously, he was angry and jealous of the parade, so he couldn't help throwing in that word conspire. It probably started off as intended to be a friendly message, and it sort of finished up with that sting in the tail.
beyond the eccentricities of President Donald Trump, I'm wondering what is your broad assessment of where the peace negotiations for Ukraine are at the moment?
I hate to say it, but I think it's going to take significantly more Ukrainian casualties and a certain amount more loss of Ukrainian land before things will gel properly into a peace process in Kiev. I say that because there are such powerful forces allied behind Zelensky at the moment, not to help him to win the war, he's lost the war completely, but to help him to sort of cling to power for a few weeks more. I'm talking about the coalition of the NATO countries who are fanatical in their determination not to see the truth about what's happening in Ukraine. Also, the powerful coalition of Ukraine Nazis and implicated top security forces who know they have no future if the war's lost, and so want to keep it going. They do have an iron grip of fear over the Ukrainian population, just as the Nazis had an iron grip of fear over the German population in the closing weeks and days of World War II. I mean, everybody knew that the Russians were nearly in Berlin, but you still didn't want to cross the Gestapo. I mean, they had the uniforms and the guns, and you were a civilian, and you kept quiet. So whatever the Ukrainian people think now, they're not telling us. And so, as I've said, Putin and Russia has taken a decision that military backbone of Ukraine has to be broken and decisively broken. And that really means as long as Ukraine keeps putting men in uniform, whether they be old men, boys, even young women these days, anybody in a uniform is going to be a legitimate Russian target in Ukraine. And any NATO person who's helping them is going to be a legitimate Russian target. So there's going to be continued bloodshed. It will be very targeted bloodshed, targeted on people in uniforms, targeted on their equipment at the front, and targeted on important backups back in the mainland of Ukraine. And the Russians know exactly where all these are. They have precision-guided missiles now. They can attack, apartment buildings. They can even attack particular apartments in apartment buildings. They can attack a British Council headquarters because they know it's actually an MI6 secret headquarters. They can go on with minimal civilian casualties, knocking the guts out of Ukraine. I'm sorry to be so blunt about it. And it's only by knocking the guts out of Ukraine that they're going to somehow trigger a process in Kiev which might bring about somebody who can negotiate a peace. Now, the peace, when I say negotiate, I put that in inverted commas because the Ukrainians have no negotiating cards left. They'll be relying essentially on Russia's desire to leave Ukraine in a state somewhat like what it left Finland in 1944. When the Russians defeated Finland in 1944, they didn't want to occupy Finland again. They just wanted to leave a reasonably sane and friendly government there. So they took a fairly large part of what had previously been Finland. They took all of Karelia. That was a sort of a divided sovereignty sort of area anyway, but Finland lost it anyway. But what was left was able to rebuild life for 80 years, a rather good life, I think, as a neutral country between East and West, not in NATO, prosperous, highly educated, a rather important player in international diplomacy. I mean, we talk about the Helsinki process, the Helsinki peace process. Helsinki was the center of global peace diplomacy for 80 years. And only now has it gone off the rails again, unfortunately. I think Alexander Stubb is actually smarter than some of his public utterances would suggest. And indeed, some of his public utterances around the time of Alaska and the subsequent meeting in the White House were enigmatic. But if you read between the lines, I think he rather thinks this himself. Ukraine really has to bite the bullet, accept it's defeated, save what it can, and get on with life as a neutral European country the way Finland did in 1944.
Yeah. And that was the example he referred to in the meeting between Trump and the European leaders in the White House, wasn't it?
Yes.
Finland
Yes,
example.
he referred explicitly to
And, that was sort of mocked to some degree because of, Finland, being allied with the Germans during the war. But as you say, there's, often in diplomacy, especially as uttered by political leaders, you have to kind of read between the lines a little bit, don't you?
You do.
There's what people say, and then there's what they're sort of doing behind the scenes. So you think maybe there might be, preparing the ground for some sort of different sort of outcome there. What do you think the way Europe is conducting it? What do you make of the way Europe is conducting itself in this diplomacy as well?
Well, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, a man called Fico, nice fellow. He's currently in Beijing for the Victory Parade. He's one of the only two European heads of state to go there. The other one is Vučić of Serbia, and Hungarian sent their foreign minister. So those three countries are properly represented in Beijing. But Fico said, for the European leaders, looking at the world is like a frog looking up at the sky from the bottom of a well. You don't see very much. You don't see context. You don't see what's happening around you. you only see a little bit of blue sky at the top of the well. And that's really where the European leaders are now. They are completely blind, willfully blind, I would say, to the reality of how the world is changing very rapidly around them. And I mean, they mock the event in Beijing. They mock the previous Shanghai Cooperation Organization event in a major Chinese city whose name I've temporarily forgotten.
Tianjin
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They still can't help condescending to China. It's in their history. 500 years of European supremacy ever since Christopher Columbus, and they can't get over it. They're still locked in a post-colonial mentality, and at the same time, they're locked in a mentality of dependency on the United States. And it's sad to see the way they were all groveling before Trump at that White House meeting a few days after Alaska. There they all were, like a bunch of recalcitrant schoolboys lined up in the headmaster's study. He's sitting behind a desk and them arrayed in front of him. I mean, the body language was appalling. As a former diplomat, I actually do believe in the principle of equality of protocol between large and small countries. Because if you don't have that equality of protocol, diplomacy can't work. And I mean, Europe learnt this at the Congress of Vienna in 1814. You go through, it might be a fiction, but you go through the protocol of treating all countries and all their leaders with respect, whether it be a small Pacific Island country or Australia or the United States, everybody deserves equal respect. And the Russians and the Chinese, they know this. They have this. Their diplomacy, they've had hundreds of years of practice. We unfortunately haven't had a lot of practice. We're still tending to pick up the bad American habits of conducting diplomacy, as the French put it, to haut en bas, from high to low. And it doesn't help us.
Yeah. And it's just contrary to like a fundamental principle of sociality, really, isn't it? It's sort of like, if you convene a meeting with people and you treat some people really badly and some people, you engage in ridiculous levels of flattery of one person, then people take that away with them and they remember it for next time, don't they?
People who flatter are usually also bullies. They decide who they're going to flatter and they decide who they're going to bully. And in public life, that's a red flag for me.
One of the questions I was keen to ask you, because you did mention you were ambassador in Cambodia. I hadn't quite put this together until we started the interview, but I would imagine that there's a very difficult sort of social political reconciliation process that is that will need to be undertaken in Ukraine to get a kind of a functioning political system again, but also just to repair the enmity and the hate and the resentment and the suffering of however you date it, 2014 or 2022 years of war. And, it's going to be like a post-conflict society. And I guess you were a diplomat there in Cambodia through probably even worse, post-conflict situation. I mean, it was the Khmer Rouge was a pretty ruthless regime, I think. Ruthless as the Kiev regime is at the moment. I think the Khmer Rouge sort of was a little bit higher up in the grade, I guess. What do you have any reflections on that experience and what Ukraine might need to? I mean, beyond people just saying standing with Ukraine and sending them weapons, I think the really humane thing to do at the moment is to kind of work out how they can reconcile as a society.
Yes. No, actually, it's a good thought, and I hadn't really approached it in the way you just had with that question. It's a very good question. And I should be thinking about the parallels because I certainly know about reconciliation after the conflict in Ukraine, in Cambodia. I know how
Yeah.
difficult it was, but it was difficult, interestingly, because not only was Hun Sen and his party, the Cambodian People's Party, trying to achieve internal reconciliation and deal with the Khmer Rouge insurrection, which was still very powerful. Very powerful. I'll tell you an anecdote. When I arrived as ambassador, having been told by the establishment narrative in Canberra that, oh, the heroic age is over in Cambodia now, and it's just a peace process. It's all over. You're just doing economic reconstruction. Well, when I got to Phnom Penh, I asked my drivers and military advisors in the embassy, well, how far out of Phnom Penh is it safe to drive? And they said, oh, about 15 kilometres. And I said, what? I said, yes. And they said, and if you stop at the roadside for a pee, don't step off the bitumen because you might step on a mine. And this was in the country that was supposed to be already at peace after Gareth Evans was, basking in the glory of the Cambodian peace process. Anyway, coming back to the point, what does the Cambodian experience teach Ukraine? Well, Hun Sen worked very hard to reconcile with the Khmer Rouge. Indeed, he offered the Khmer Rouge commanders to be part of the Cambodian National Army, and many of them accepted that offer and became Cambodian soldiers. They just changed uniforms. And with the hardcore irredentists, they were dealt with in different ways, rather violent ways. At the same time, he was dealing with a concerted American effort at regime change. The Americans wanted to have him and the Cambodian People's Party as a post-communist party out, and they wanted the Ranariddh royalists in, the Ranariddh royalists being docile and easily malleable by the West, rather like Zelensky in Kiev. So the West obviously supported Ranariddh in every possible sort of covert way. They failed. Hun Sen won. He combined toughness with guile, with diplomacy. And I think that's what's going to have to be done in Ukraine. There are plenty of Ukrainians, as I said a moment ago, they're hiding their light under a bushel now for very understandable reasons. There are plenty of Ukrainians whose native language is Russian, whose culture is Russian, who will be very keen to cooperate in trying to rebuild not only the parts of Ukraine that have become part of Russia, those Crimea and the four provinces, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, but also in the parts that remain part of Ukraine. And I hope that will include Kharkov and Odessa, because, I mean, they're the civilized parts of Ukraine. If you take away Kharkov and Odessa and Kiev, Ukraine's basically a peasant country with some rather nasty sort of Ukraine Nazis in the western part. So Ukraine really needs Kharkov, Odessa, and Kiev to have some sort of level of civility and, I suppose, civilization, frankly. And the Russians will work with whatever's left of Ukraine. And I think recovery could be surprisingly fast because the Russians have had a lot of practice at this. Not only in the Soviet years when they occupied many European countries, which just recently liberated from the Nazis. They had to deal with that, with NATO enmity and the Warsaw Pact and so on. But then even more recently, they've had to deal with attempted insurrection in Belarus, which was very serious. I mean, Belarus is now well settled as a very good and close neighbour to Russia, but it was touch and go for a few weeks. But there was almost a regime change there. In Georgia, there was a regime change for several years under Saakashvili. Georgia was pretty much in the Western camp. Now they've come back into the more the neutral, friendly neighbour to Russia, which Russia wants. So I don't think it's going to be all that difficult. I mean, the physical reconstruction of Ukraine is going to be enormous. Everything's being destroyed. I mean, all the infrastructure. They've got to rebuild the Kakhovka Dam, which, has a whole hydrological regime behind it that's been destroyed. they've got to rebuild so many electronic switching stations, so many important factories. I think the people in Ukraine are going to be kept very busy, as the people in Germany were after 1945, on physical reconstruction. I don't think there'll be much time for thinking about the past, to be honest. I
Yeah.
think I'm an optimist. Once
Yeah.
that corner is turned, once peace comes, I think recovery will come.
Yeah. That's really interesting, isn't it? And like, I mean, it's always so hard to tell in the fog of war media reports, but certainly the physical reconstruction in Mariupol, for example, appears at least to be quite significant as well.
I see the
But
drama
yeah, that would
theatres
be interesting.
well. The drama theatre's well on the way to reopening. They're
Yeah,
rebuilding the drama theatre, which was the
yeah,
scene of a notorious false flag attack. The
yeah,
Ukrainian nationalists blew it up as they were retreating, and then
yeah,
they pretended that it was a result of a Russian missile.
yeah.
And they'd locked
Indeed.
people in the basement. They'd hoped that they'd be killed in the basement, but fortunately, the concrete floor was strong enough that it didn't break, and they were able to escape after the
Yeah,
attack.
yeah.
Sorry, I keep
And
introducing all these little anecdotes, but
no,
you know,
no, that's excellent. That's excellent, Tony. I was just going to say, especially for any Australian viewers, of course, you would not have heard that on the ABC.
no,
Yeah, at least if anyone is watching the Birdie Archive rather than the ABC, that you'll get a bit more of the truth.
what's that famous saying from Hamlet? There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio.
Yeah.
I feel one could say that to the ABC. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in their philosophy. They just have this
Yeah.
way of ignoring news they don't like.
Yeah. It's really quite astonishing. And a few years ago, I actually I made a formal complaint to the ABC about its news coverage of the whole Russiagate sort of business, and it was a complete waste of time on my part, but at least it made me feel better. But gee.
Lost cause.
Lost cause, yeah. I mean, these days, I only notice it when occasionally people point out ABC stories to me. For my mental and intellectual health, I don't really watch the ABC or read actually the media in Australia. But in a way, that's also a bit of a condemnation of that media. I was going to ask you something about that. And it's just slipped my mind for a second. But I guess we wanted also to talk a little bit about the situation with Iran and Israel and Gaza, etc. And I guess the reference to what the Khmer Rouge did in Cambodia is, or I think it was then known as Kampuchea, is a reminder of the sort of genocide, mass killings, war crimes or state organised violence that can happen from time to time, and is certainly happening at the moment in Gaza. You've been among the strong Australian voices talking, calling for a stronger response to the situation in Israel and Gaza, Palestine. Did you want to make some comments on that situation?
Yeah, well,
and I guess where Australia is at with it, really, because it's a bit mysterious, really, isn't it, where Australia is at with this?
to say the least. I'll say a little bit about my personal epiphany on this because I think it is relevant to your question. Up until the September attack in 2003 on the music festival by military personnel from Gaza who were trying to take hostages back. And for a couple of weeks after that, as I digested the news coming in about that, I had an epiphany. I had a road to Damascus moment, and I realised that I'd been lied to by Zionists all my life, and that they are an evil ideology, which has taken the state of Israel and perverted its course from the very beginning, really. Some would argue the whole concept was misconceived, but even admitting there might have been some genuine idealism at the beginning, they've just gone worse and worse down the course of evil. And everything that's happened in Gaza in the last 2 years since that attack has confirmed to me in my mind that Israel has no future, it cannot survive, because it's committed so much evil. The state of Israel, the ideology that supports that state, can't be accepted in a civilized world. I know this is very strong language, but I stand by it. And as a result of that epiphany, and as a result of being able finally to rise above my half-Jewish background, which inclined me to run away from the subject. I was one of those people of partly Jewish descent who feel uncomfortable when this is talked about and basically avoid the subject, which is what I spent a lot of my life doing. But then I realized that, when you walk past evil, you become part of evil. And so this is why the last 2 years have been very, very different for me. Now, because just to say, as I say in my book, Return to Moscow, and I've made no secret of it, my ancestry, my philosophical and ethnic ancestry, if you can call it ethnic, I don't call it ethnic, is half Viennese Jewish and half Irish Catholic. And so I've lived with those tensions in my character, and I've learned to deal with it. Anyway, coming back to the impact on Australia, the impact has been huge because we have always regarded Jews who've been part of Australian history ever since the first fleet. There were Jews as convicts on the first ships, as kind of honorary Anglo-Australians, should we put it that way, honorary Anglo-Irish Australians. We've never really thought of Australia's Jews as migrants. I mean, people like Sir John Monash, the illustrious general, wonderful general, Isaac Isaacs, Zelman Cohen, the Governor General. These men were not Zionists. They were proud Jews, but they were not Zionists. And the way Zionism has taken over parts of the Australian Jewish community in the last 20 years particularly is to me a grievous thing. And I'm very encouraged that there is fight back. I mean, an organisation like the Jewish Council of Australia, with its wonderful, hard-working committee, is doing wonderful things to show that there is an alternative way of being Jewish in Australia. I can't be part of that because I'm a practicing Catholic, sort of, pretty much twice a year practicing Catholic, but I hope there'll be a priest at my bedside when I die. And I can't really join what the Jewish Council of Australia is doing, but I thoroughly commend what they're doing. Now, the Bridge Walk and the comparable events in other capital cities was a wonderful thing because it finally gave the lie to all those falsehoods that the Zionists have been peddling about the horrible genocidal massacre that's going on in Gaza. Nobody can deny it. I mean, it's beyond the point of argument. It's just horrible. It's monstrous. And anybody who defends it, I would find it difficult, frankly, to discuss the matter with them. Now, if I feel that way, how do so many other Australians feel? And why is it that the government and the opposition are so blind to it? And unfortunately, the answer is, as in Britain in the years before the setting up of the State of Israel, the Zionist movement has been incredibly skillful at infiltrating and indoctrinating powerful people in the society to which it belongs. And I've got to use my words very carefully here because it would be very easy to be misrepresented as being anti-Semitic or as caricaturing Jewish people. The fact is that Jewish people are very hardworking, very motivated, very philosophical, and very effective in whatever they turn their minds to, whether it be science or art or finance or politics. And you see this particularly in the liberal Anglo societies, Australia, Britain, Canada, United States, where the commanding heights of politics have been tremendously importantly influenced by, and are being tremendously importantly influenced by Zionist lobbies. I don't know where this is going. I mean, we've got the beginnings of a Nazi movement here in Australia now. It's pretty horrible. There are an awful lot of misguided people, marching around under Australian flags and talking about stopping immigration. Australia is losing its way. And I think the Zionist lobbying bears a large part of the responsibility for this, because they have destabilized our society in all sorts of ways. I think, the activities of a woman like Gillian Siegel and the activities of the Liebler brothers and Alex Rivchin, these people, they don't seem to understand that their primary loyalty is not to Australia, it's to Israel. And everything proceeds from that. And they confuse our political elites. They manufacture red herrings. Now, let's get to Iran. No reasonable person could accept that Iran would have had a motive for blowing up a cafe and an Orthodox synagogue in Sydney and an Orthodox synagogue in Melbourne. There's no motive for the state of Iran, which is fighting for its life against the state of Israel, backed by United States power, to bother with blowing up a minority synagogue in Melbourne that wasn't even a pro-Zionist synagogue. It's a Hasidic synagogue which doesn't support Zionism. So they get their holy scrolls, their Torah scrolls, burnt. Now, I mean, that to me smacks of a Zionist attack, because there would be a certain malevolence in going after the anti-Zionist synagogue. If it had been a pro-Zionist synagogue, I wouldn't have a leg to stand on here. But, I mean, a little bit too clever by half, that particular atrocity. And so how did Albanese get Burgess, the Director General of ASIO, to stand up on a platform with him and present these decisions? Now, Burgess was very careful with his language. He said it's probable that it was Iran. Well, I mean, in intelligence language, probable is less than 90%. So Burgess says it's less than 90% that it was Iran. And you don't think that Mossad doesn't have the ability to create a false flag narrative pointing to Iran? Of course they do. They're the best secret service in the world. I mean, anybody who can run Epstein so successfully for so many years wouldn't find it hard to create a false narrative pointing towards Iran. People, I mean, the Australian criminal world, we know that the Dural white van was criminals. We know that that's a pretty murky thing. The people who are behind Zionism in Australia, they know the society well. They've been living here for as long as anybody has. They know where the criminals are. They know how to find them. They know how to manufacture false trails. And I just don't accept it was Iraq. Now, Albanese was in a difficult situation because he's trying to hold on to the alliance with the United States, which is the Trump United States. For the time being, Trump is not recolonized. Trump's mind has not yet been recolonized by the anti-Russian alliance. Trump is trying different things. He's confused. He's looking for a way. Albanese was probably advised, give Trump something he can be pleased about Australia. He'll probably be annoyed about the huge marches across the bridge and so on. So 2 days later, Trump gets the news, Australia's just expelled the Iranian ambassador. Can you see how that would put a little smile across Trump's face? Oh, the Aussies, they're doing a good thing. I think that's where it all comes from. It comes
Yeah.
from a political motivation to create a balancing event in Australia to balance the impact on Trump of the marches.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, that was my sense of it too, that it was, I mean, from an Australian perspective, I mean, there is a small Iranian community in Australia, has been for, quite a while. There was quite a significant Persian community just near where I live, in fact, for many decades. But and yet, for Australia, it's a low cost gesture, really, to expel an ambassador who, frankly, Australia hasn't terribly civil relations with, because a couple of weeks ago, it said it was fine for the United States to, bomb its nuclear facilities in Iran. So,
Yes.
and as you say, it came on the heels of the recognition of Palestine, the major marches, and that sort of thing. So it did feel like it was a compensatory sort of gesture, rather than a genuinely serious thing. Although I have heard some analysts, I had a discussion with Kevork Almassian on my show the other day, who is quite wary of a possible, I guess, second wave attack against Iran in the relatively over the next 12 months.
Well,
And,
could I
yeah.
say something about that? I mean, I've just put up something on my Facebook and page Tony Kevin and copied it to my Twitter page at lowercase Tony Kevin, one word, which gives my thoughts on, if you like, a tour d'horizon of what's going on in the world right now. I talked about one of the two apparent greatest threats to peace at the moment, and one is a second round of hostilities between Iran and Israel, and the second is an American attack on Venezuela. Now, they're both proximate, immediate high risks. Higher risks, I think, than anything unexpected happening in Ukraine, because I think, as I say, the Ukraine war's won, and it's all over by the shouting. It just somehow a regime change has to take place in Kiev. But coming back to Israel, Iran, and Venezuela, Iran will not launch a preemptive attack against Israel. They have no reason to. They're busy rebuilding the damage of the last war. Will Israel launch a preemptive attack on Iran? I don't think so. I think they'll go as close as they can to it without actually doing it, because they know that Iran has the missile capability and the drone capability to destroy civilized life in the very small territory of Israel. I mean, they can literally destroy Israel. Will Israel then use the Samson option, use its nuclear weapons in a despairing Masada-style act of revenge against Iran and maybe others in the region? I mean, we're in Dr. Strangelove territory here. I can't say it won't happen. That's obviously not impossible. But I think it's unlikely, because I think people in Israel retain a sufficient rationality to know that there's a point beyond which they should not push Iran. On the Venezuela one, there again, there's a very interesting interview which Glenn Deason, who's a very clever and good commentator based in Norway, he had a Venezuelan political journalist on yesterday. And I went away from listening to that interview, which was in great detail, pretty convinced that Trump is letting Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth, who are not the brightest lights in the Christmas tree, conduct a campaign of bluff, intimidation, provocation against Venezuela. See if they push buttons hard, what will happen. I don't think Trump's going to let them authorize a land invasion by the United States. I think that the worst that could happen would be the reason he wouldn't authorize it is because the cost to American lives and so on would be massive. And he doesn't want that. The worst that he might authorise would be some sort of a punitive, quote, decapitation strike, unquote, trying to take out maybe Chavez and elements of the Venezuelan leadership. I'm sure they're prepared for that, and they won't give him easy targets. So I have a feeling, once again, I may be too optimistic, but I have a feeling that the Venezuela crisis will die down. I think both crises are effectively distractions from what's happening in Beijing today, which is the really important world news. And so I come away feeling, on the whole, still optimistic.
Yeah. Tony, I'll include a link to that your piece in the video when I release this interview as a separate video tomorrow. I'm just wondering, maybe one last question before I let you go. You mentioned, the sense of how the world is changing that you got from watching the parade, the victory parade in Beijing today. And, a lot of people focused on those images of Modi and Xi and Putin together in Tianjin in the last couple of days as well. What gives you source for optimism in the current events?
Well,
without necessarily, engaging in, wishful thinking.
No, sure. I try to avoid wishful thinking.
Yeah.
When you put together the guest lists for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in Tianjin and the guest list for the military victory parade today in Beijing, you get some very interesting conclusions. And in the old dialectic of the maritime powers versus the Eurasian heartland, the House of MacIver, famous geopolitical model of the world. There's still some relevance in that, of course, and George Orwell drew on it in 1984. But when you look at the guest list of the two meetings combined, what you're seeing is the whole of Eurasia, a couple of 3 Europeans, and all of ASEAN except for Thailand and Brunei. That's remarkable. And you're seeing both South Korea and North Korea. You're seeing India and Pakistan. You're seeing all of the former Soviet republics across Central Asia. You're seeing, including Iran, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, all of the stans, they're all there. Afghanistan. This is huge. This is huge. And for the Americans and their allies and satraps to sort of write it off as a spectacle of no great political significance, blah, 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 it's just pathetic because it is very significant. And we Australians, we just got to wake up and smell the coffee because we're on the wrong horse. We're backing the wrong horse.
Yeah.
And we've got to back away from the United States. I'm not saying we've got to become the United States enemy. Of course not. Our ties with the United States are very substantial and historic and emotional and valuable. But we've got to stand back and we've got to start charting our own foreign policy course, which we tried to do under Malcolm Fraser and Gough Whitlam and to some extent Bob Hawke and Paul Keating, but we've completely lost that now.
Yeah.
And if I can just finish up by saying, I really do want to work with Pearls and Irritations again because it's the best voice in Australia of political realism today. Yeah. And so I don't want people to go away from this interview thinking that I've badmouthed John Menadue or badmouthed Pearls and Irritations. That has not been my intention.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely, Tony, and we won't do that. And be great to have another chat with you, maybe a little bit further down the track and get your insights into all these events thank you so much for your insights today. It's been absolutely fantastic. As I say, I'll include the link to your piece and also to your wonderful book, Return to Moscow, which I've been enjoying in the video for the interview. But Tony, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been great talking to you.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been a great opportunity and a privilege.